He had often gone alone into the void places seeking the imperishable flame, for desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own. Yet he found not the fire, for it is with Iluvatar. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we are discussing a topic that, honestly, I've thought a lot about. I've mentioned it on a few podcasts, maybe in live streams, and I've had this thought in my mind for quite a few years now, actually. I have a theory that the main servants of Morgoth and Sauron, primarily orcs, trolls, and dragons, do not have souls or free will. This may also apply to Uruk-hai, wargs, and the like, but we will focus on these three creatures in this video. This obviously does not apply to any humanoid, any sort of Easterling, Haradrim, Dunlending, anyone like that, but really the monsters of Tolkien's works that directly serve evil. So I'm excited to take you all through it. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. From the outset, the quote at the beginning of this video is really what grabbed my attention about this issue first. Even from the beginning, Melkor always had a will to create and subjugate and dominate. Even before the creation of Arda, he wandered the darkness for a time searching for that which gives true life and free will, something amounting to a soul, something called the flame imperishable, or the secret fire. Yet Melkor could never find such a thing, for it was always and only with Eru Iluvatar. Originally, they were more like automatons, acting not of their own life essence, but as creations of Aule. Yet when Eru adopted them, he nourished them with that life force, the flame imperishable, souls, free will, all of these things. We know in Tolkien's works that evil cannot truly create. It can destroy, corrupt, and twist. Yet at other points in the Legendarium, it is as though Melkor did create things, such as dragons, as unlike trolls, they are not twisted mockeries explicitly, as the trolls were of Ents, nor were they manipulations of elven forms like orcs were. They were something else entirely. We'll get to the dragons in a moment, because in my mind, dragons present perhaps the most interesting issue here. So like I said about trolls, I must imagine that, perhaps at some capacity, it's very possible that trolls were simply twisted or corrupted, perverted Ents, or were formed from parts of the earth or some such, twisted and manipulated into what we know them as, which were imitations and mockeries of the Ents. I must imagine that they probably had less life essence than Ents, perhaps being only the vessels of Melkor's malice. Now, even based on the personalities of Bill, Bert, and Tom, it seems that there's a lot of personality and so forth that really shine through with a lot of these trolls. But perhaps because of how they can die, maybe trolls are some sort of automaton as well, yet they were never granted true life like the dwarves were, but rather were made of some sort of natural elements and kept on being machine-like, rather than, again, ascending into something else. As for orcs, they are also a complicated issue, but for other reasons. Obviously, they were not simply created, but they were tortured and corrupted elves, so changed that they became what we know them as. But that actually presents a few problems concerning orcs and the morality surrounding them. How much of their elven nature did they retain? How much of their souls, free will, and the rest? How much of the flame imperishable did they keep? Now, I get into all of this in my video on if orcs can be redeemed, but there is another point to be made here too. Would elves even decide to keep their souls in becoming orcs? And would they just serve Morgoth? I don't think so. There is some lore in the extended history of Middle-earth writing, which discusses how elves are able to unlink their souls and bodies, their Fear and Hrorar, and depart from their bodies, going to the halls of the unhoused in Valinor. Now, it is said they would only do this under extreme duress and very rarely, and would likely not want to do so willingly. But to be honest, I can't think of a more stressful and horrible moment than being twisted and mutilated into an orc. So if anything counts as very stressful, I feel like this would make the top of the list. But what would take the place of their souls and free will? Morgoth's malice, I must believe, would take over the husk left behind in the orc. Why would elves retain their essence rather than go to Valinor and the halls of Mandos to do the evil deeds that the orcs would do, particularly when they had this ability to unhouse themselves, if very rarely needed? Finally, we have the dragons. What's funny about them is that it seems Morgoth clearly created them in some way. We know that Morgoth could not truly create. Melkor, Sauron, they couldn't truly create, nor house within something like a dragon, the flame imperishable. No, it's my belief, at least in accordance with this theory, if it is true, is that the dragons were handcrafted mockeries of Manwë's eagles, and, just as one may argue that those eagles simply carried the will of Manwë, the dragons carried the malice and will of Morgoth. I see the dragons to be more like two drones, with their power of spells, curses, of powers in flight and destruction, being more directly the will of Morgoth. I do wonder if the dragons did not have souls, free will, etc., but were instead the vessels of Morgoth's spirit that was given unto the dragons, and thus they were made to fully and completely serve him. And so that's why it seems as though the dragons have personality and so forth. It's really just the spirit and malice, the magic of Morgoth channeling through them. Now, is this theory perfect? Absolutely not. For instance, with the dragons, one might say that Smaug and his will went on way after Morgoth was exiled from Arda. But again, in my mind, there was some sort of spiritual essence that was perhaps left behind in the dragons, if this was true. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if this theory isn't true about the orcs, trolls, dragons, and so forth, I'm not exactly sure how we explain that evil cannot create, because it seems as though Morgoth created at least the dragons. I'm not sure why the elves wouldn't unhouse themselves from the orcs, and again, it presents an ethical problem, which I'll get into in a second, and if this theory isn't true, I'm not even sure what the case for him not creating the trolls would have been. According to the wise, it is said that even though the orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of elves and men, they didn't truly have life of their own, nor the semblance of real life. And so if that's the case, I must imagine that this theory is true. And going back to the point on orcish morality, this also explains why they are not perhaps worthy of sympathy when they are put to the sword by our heroes. These beings were corrupted, nearly summoned or crafted slaves for entirely evil purposes, and in that viewpoint, they could not simply be redeemed. It was not in their code or capacity, their potential or ability to be brought back. Empty husks of hateful will that opposed the West entirely. Therefore, when the known dragons of the world were ended by Bard the Bowman, or Gandalf let the sun absolutely annihilate Will, Bert, and Tom, or our heroes amongst elves, men, and dwarves finished off the final orcs in the Fourth Age, I don't believe we should feel sorrow for these evil creatures, not in how they were established in Tolkien's works. And again, this theory upholds that idea, because really, if anything, it would be more of a mercy to, at least with orcs, finally release the elven body and defeat it, or the descendants of the elven bodies at least, from the torment that Morgoth put them through to dominate them. Now our heroes are meant to be that, heroic, and Eru is meant to be a fair and just god of this world of Arda. I don't believe he would simply let Melkor use the flame imperishable in later days just like he didn't let him in the beginning. He only gave dwarves that life, only gave Ents that life, as he had done for men and elves, with the prayers of Aule and Yavanna, their manifestors who wished for these beings of good heart to be brought into the world and taken unto Eru's realm. Perhaps when Aule submitted to his sorrow and guilt and went to destroy his own creations, rather than going against Eru's will, that is when they were finally allowed to be dwarves. Morgoth, though very similar to Aule in many ways, would never show such humility nor grace about his creations. And so, my friends, these are my thoughts on this theory, that most of the servants of darkness do not have true souls, or free will, or the flame imperishable, or the secret fire within them. All of these things were simply applied to true life, that which Eru either created or allowed and adopted into his creations. Now, I think that these evil creatures may each of them be explained to be entirely different than the free peoples in their nature, and I think that may have been the intent from Tolkien. And so, my friends, we come to the end of our tale. Now, I did not mention much about men, good nor evil, in this video, because, honestly, from this story, we must remember that none of us in this world are indeed orcs. We are each of us redeemable, and have the capacity to love in our hearts, for we are of the race of men. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on this theory? Are you convinced by this, or is there something that I missed? Let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles, or order some Weta United Cutlery Lord of the Rings sword statues and other replicas from Castle Kon, who does international shipping, and use the code WEST at checkout. And please check out our merch. Join our memberships and Patreon for access to our Discord server and our monthly podcast. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons and YouTube members, as well as our newest one, Ed Patterson, Brian Hunley, Peter Shepard, John Hume, Reese Jenkins, Arthur Merlin, Theodore, Andrew Carlisle, and Zoomi. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again next week with a video on Could Sauron Have Been Redeemed? My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.